Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, November 20th, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Very busy news day. We have got lots to talk about. We're going to get right into it. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. A reminder that in our third hour, the lovely lady Claire will be joining us again with her unique perspective on what's going on in the world. Getting right into it, of course, the big news, hostage crisis at the Radisson Hotel in Mali. At least 9 people killed. Pardon me. And again, hallmarks of another staged terror attack to do booga booga. Now, if you're thinking the name Mali sounds familiar, you ought to. Because remember, back when Germany started asking for their gold back from the New York Federal Reserve and from the Bank of France, both the Federal Reserve and the Bank of France shuffled their feet and kind of looked down and said, well, it's going to take us a few years. And then a couple of weeks later, France invaded Mali, which happens to be Africa's third largest gold producer. Yeah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Of course, absolutely, one does not have to do with the other. And of course, the people of Mali have been a little unhappy with France's presence there. So now there's a terror attack and France gets to go in and act Bush and say, you know, see, you need us here to keep you safe. Now, according to media reports, several hostages were released. They were basically told anybody who could quote a phrase from the Koran would be allowed to go, and that's what happened. In order to make sure that these people go on out and say, oh yes, they're Muslims. Really, they're Muslims. They made me quote the Koran. And that's why I'm still alive. They had to be Muslims with that. However, 2 things you need to keep in mind. Witnesses are saying the Mali attackers spoke English, and they arrived at the hotel compound. They got in past security, part way, with a car that had diplomatic license plates. Nobody's saying which nation those diplomatic license plates belong to. Big, huge hole in the story there. Now, getting on back to the false flag in Paris, as it turns out, several of the named suspects in the Paris attacks were already on the U.S. terror watch lists. My goodness, they weren't even running the names past the terror watch list as they welcomed in all the refugees. Now, you know the guy who was the accused mastermind? And they said he was dead. No, he's not dead. Yes, he's dead again. They're not really sure here. Eyewitnesses are reporting seeing this guy right after the attacks were over, sitting at a sidewalk cafe drinking whiskey. After the attacks, he was apparently in a very good mood. He even offered somebody a drink. Witnesses who were familiar with him said that he drank all the time, drank beer, smoked marijuana. So this guy isn't actually a Muslim, is he? Despite all the caterwauling in the corporate media about Muslim, ISIS, Muslim. He's not a very good Muslim. Remember Mohammed Atta in 9/11? Oh, he's fanatical Islamic terrorist. He's willing to commit suicide and go to Allah. And then we found out he was living with a stripper, doing drugs and drinking. Now, our female suicide bomber. Have you been paying attention as the corporate media makes a big deal, a media icon, over the first female suicide bomber, and how she blew herself up in the raid on the house? As it turns out, she too wasn't a very good Muslim. She was drinking booze. She was hanging out with drug dealers and probably indulging in the freebies, and apparently liked to take naked photos of herself in a bubble bath to send out over social media. Doesn't sound like a real Muslim. And there are all these stories coming about how she instantaneously turned from this wild party animal into a fanatical Muslim willing to blow herself up. Well, it's too little too late, because now the French police have confirmed this lady, Hasna Ait Boulachen, did not actually have a suicide explosive vest. Remember when they were showing the video and I said, it doesn't sound like that was an exploding vest. It sounds like gunfire. The French police are now saying, no, this woman was not wearing a suicide vest and did not blow herself up. Period. End of discussion. The egg timer hadn't even run out on that one when it fell apart. Now, after all the screaming by the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, the DIA, everybody got, we must ban encryption, it will save us from terrorist attack, we must ban encryption. The French police have now acknowledged that the attacks were coordinated using code phrases over unencrypted SMS text messages. They weren't even using encryption. And they still couldn't stop these guys. In my opinion, they didn't want to. They needed the bloody shirts to get the war agenda going. The European Union looks to be caving into the bankers, and they're talking about banning Bitcoin and all cyber currencies after Paris because that's how the terrorists are funding themselves, with Bitcoin wallets. And that'll turn out to be another piece of disinformation to serve a private agenda. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Lenny in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's Glenn from Philadelphia.
Glenn from Philadelphia. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. We heard on the news break that Netanyahu giving his best wishes and blessings to Jonathan Pollard.
Mm-hmm.
Am I the only one that thinks it stinks to high heaven that he's being kept in New York to get a job? Because I'm thinking they're hanging him out there like bait, and even if he has Mossad or even Secret Service bodyguards, why aren't they just whisking him away to Israel where they love him instead of leaving him in a place where there are a lot of people who hate him? It's almost like they want to tempt bait. They're almost like they're hanging him out there like bait to see if anybody takes a shot at him so that they can scream and cry about it.
Well, that's certainly something to consider. I mean, I'm one of the people who are furious he got out of jail at all. I mean, given the scale given his scale of betrayal, he should have been given the same sentence that the Rosenbergs were for stealing America's nuclear secrets and sending them on the way to the Soviet Union. The crimes are equivalent. And, keeping him there in New York. Now, my understanding is he's required to stay in his residence. It doesn't look like he's going to go out and get a job. Who would hire him? Let's be honest.
No, they said they got a job for him. They got him a job.
Okay, well, I thought he was getting all this lifetime pension and medical care from the Israeli government. He doesn't need a job. You're right. If somebody were to take a shot at him, it would be applauded here in the United States of America. And, of course, Israel would have another martyr to say, oh, the anti-Semites, the Jew haters, oh, see, they're just, But, it's going to be...
It's almost like they're advertising it. He's released and he's going to have a job and he's going to stay in New York and have a great Sabbath, and Netanyahu's addressing. It's like they're drawing attention to it.
Well, there's two things going on. First of all, I think Obama is saying he's going to stay here in the U.S., so it doesn't look like a total sellout to Netanyahu, and it's another way for Obama to express his dissatisfaction with Netanyahu after that embarrassing romp before Congress over the P5+1. But I am willing to wager a plugged Turkish piastre here that it will only be a matter of weeks before Pollard is allowed to go to Israel. When we're all distracted with Christmas shopping or something else or the next big terror attack, they're going to say, yeah, Pollard, you can go.
Yeah, frankly, I think that's best because, people will be annoyed, but at least it'll be over and he'll be out of the way.
Well, again, it's not my idea of a best solution. I mean, spying is a very serious situation here. And the fact of the matter is, and I wrote an article about this, the mother of all scandals. I'm going to reprise it to the front page during this next commercial break. The United States has had a habitual practice of going very easily on Israeli spies and cutting them a lot of slack. Like, remember those Mossad agents who were arrested after 9/11? They'd been dancing and cheering and high-fiving, and they were held for a few weeks and then very quietly sent back to Israel, where they were greeted like celebrities, and they got TV interviews about how they were there in New York to document 9/11. And it's embarrassing. Israeli spies are treated with kid gloves. And what's that going to get us? More Israeli spies. And remember, in the weeks just before 9/11, the FBI uncovered the largest foreign spy ring ever to operate in the United States of America, working for Israel. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Glenn, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And during the commercial break, I did go ahead and post to the main page of WhatReallyHappened.com not only this article about the constant Israeli spying in our country and how our government just pats them on the head and shoos them away, treats them with kid gloves. I put up the story about the dancing Israelis, those Mossad agents who were arrested after witnesses saw them cheering and clapping as the World Trade Towers collapses. And then I put up the article about the Israeli spy ring that was uncovered just before 9/11. that Carl Cameron did over on Fox News, in which he acknowledged there was evidence that linked the arrested Mossad agents with 9/11, but it was classified by the United States government. So, there we are. Let's see. What do we got here? All right. A while back, I was talking about this embarrassing revelation where the Joint Chiefs called in the Navy Admiral and said, how well will our carrier battle groups do if we actually go to war with Russia and China? And he said, they'll last 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you keep them in port. And a lot of people say, oh, come on, that can't be. We just found a video of this guy being interviewed on the media, and we just put that on the front page of What Really Happened. Now, getting on back to Russia and Syria. Russia and the Syrian Air Forces have hit 344 ISIS targets in 1 day. They are giving them a horrendous pounding between the Syrian Air Force, the local Russian planes, the backfire, and now Bear bombers coming down from Russia directly, submarine-launched cruise missiles in the Mediterranean. According to the Russian defense minister, 600 ISIS fighters were killed by the cruise missile attack at Deir ez-Zor. Russia is proving they are a potent and effective fighting force. Now, Russian jets have destroyed refineries, trucks, and wells under the control of ISIS. And they're doing that because ISIS is producing 40 to 50 million barrels of oil a day, which Europe is happy to buy. Remember, we reported that last week, where they were dropping the sanctions against oil being sold by the good rebels in order to help the rebels against Bashar al-Assad. And Russia is pulling the plug on that little arrangement as well. Now, under the current onslaught, the terrorists in Syria are losing over $1 million daily. And all wars ultimately come down to economics. When you run out of money, you have lost the war. Meanwhile, Russian security services prevent possible attempts to destabilize the situation by means of ISIS. Have you noticed how wonderfully effective Russia's security services are at finding and stopping ISIS terror attacks? Certainly far better than the French, far better than the Americans. But then Russia has an advantage. They really want to stop these things. The U.S. is now supplying selected rebels, the good rebels, the clean on our side. We love these terrorists, with weapons capable of shooting down passenger airliners. We're not talking about just man-pads which can go after low-flying warplanes. We're talking about weapons that can knock down a passenger jet at altitude, probably in advance of the backfires. But they're giving these guys incredibly potent weapons. Now, U.S. Senator Richard Black is making a lot of headlines because he has come on out. He's not being politically correct. He's out there basically saying the truth. The war in Syria will end when all foreign support to the terrorist groups stop. And he says the United States was wrong to arm those groups. And that's absolutely true. And remember, while the U.S. was actually doing that arming, they weren't telling you. You were all being told, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are bad. They're the enemies. We're in a war on terror. They're the enemies. And now we find out the government was spending your tax dollars to send very lethal weapons into the hands of the people we were being told were our mortal enemies. That fits the legal definition of an act of treason. Article coming out, Saudi Arabia, bloody bankroller of Syrian terror, and they're basically looking at the flow of cash. Just like Putin said, follow the money. 40 countries are covertly funding ISIS to use ISIS to change the map of the Middle East. Russia's now investigating. Saudi Arabia's been doing a lot of the laundering there. Now, Saudi Arabia has managed to use up a lot of their weapons stockpile, trying to pound the people of Yemen back into accepting U.S. puppet rule. So the United States, despite the fact that Saudi Arabia is now accused of committing war crimes in Yemen, the United States government is approving a sale, $1.29 billion worth of new bombs to Saudi Arabia's Air Force. A little double dealing going on there. Now, there's a story that has come on out where supposedly members of ISIS have gone public admitting they are able to buy some of the weapons that they need from Ukraine. Remember that Ukrainian nationalists got up and said ISIS is our spiritual brothers against Russia. And now we're getting a confirmation that one of the sources for the weapons for the terrorists in Syria is Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry is saying, we don't know. It's a non-denial denial. But the weapons are being bought in Ukraine and sent into Syria through Turkey, which is complicit in all of this. Now, there's an interesting article at Consortium News, The Tangled Threads of U.S. False Narratives. And they're focusing on something I've been saying for quite a long time. The propaganda has fallen apart. There's no clear narrative thread. There's no coherent, internally self-consistent alternative reality for people to subscribe to. The propaganda is just all over the place. It contradicts itself. And this is what happens when you mount a propaganda campaign using advertising agencies and public relations firms. Because institutionally, they're only thinking the short term. 30-second, 60-second, 2-week sales campaign, 3-month sales campaign at most. Then you just completely erase the board and start over with a whole new approach to sell shampoo or whatever it is you're selling. But for propaganda to work, it has to present a clear, understandable, consistent alternative reality in order to replace reality. And this doesn't, and that's why it's falling apart. By the way, if you're wondering where all the corporate media got their source for that soda can bomb idea, apparently they're quoting the ISIS magazine verbatim without even bothering to say, maybe this isn't accurate. That's the corporate media's source for that whole story. We got it from ISIS magazine. It must be true. The terrorists wouldn't lie to us. It's amazing. The problem is, of course, the actual investigators are saying, no, that bomb that's depicted in the picture wouldn't have brought down the airline. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And John Kerry is now out there with this bizarre statement saying that the United States can neutralize Daesh or ISIS or ISIL, whatever they're calling themselves this week, faster than it did Al-Qaeda. We can do it. We're on the edge of victory here. And I have to tell you, I'm very disgusted with this. And I'm disgusted with it for a very simple reason. If you think back to the history of World War II, the United States did not enter that war using Roosevelt's Pearl Harbor dodge until after Russia had already turned the tide against Nazi Germany. And ever since then, the United States has been trying to act like the United States won World War II. Certainly, that's always the perspective that we see in TV shows and movies about how great the Americans were in World War II. And they're doing it again. Russia has all but eradicated ISIS in Syria, and now Kerry wants to walk on in and act like this is an American victory. I think you could fertilize entire deserts with John Kerry's mouth at this point. Alrighty. Now then, there's a new video out threatening an attack on the White House. It's a 6-minute video released by the Islamic State fighters in Iraq, applauding Paris and saying, we are going to come and hit the White House. Very professionally produced video, high dynamic range camera, studio lighting or video lighting setup, very slick production. And the articles are admitting this is coming from Site Intelligence Group. The corporate media doesn't seem to understand that when they acknowledge they're using Site Intelligence Group, we all know it is a manufactured fake. It's another Rita Katz production. They're going to have to put her up for an Academy Award for Best Fiction. Now, the head of the FBI is saying we don't have any credible threats against the White House, but the corporate media is out there to sell the terror and sell the fear. So they're going to give Rita Katz more credibility and gravitas than the head of the FBI. It's amazing. Down at Channel 9 News in Australia, And they've come out with this interesting story. There was an ISIS cell arrested in Kuwait that had 2 Australians in it. So I guess we're going to go bomb Australia now, right? Because ISIS came from there. And you can see how open-ended this whole situation is. And again, look at the situation. France is in Syria, the U.S. is in Syria, saying we've got to bomb them, they're horrible, horrible terrorists, look at Paris, and yet every one of the named suspects had European Union passports. The only Syrian passports in play, held up as the reason for bombing Syria, turned out to be fake. Now, France has declared a state of emergency. They've extended it for 3 months. They are grabbing themselves all kinds of authorities, including the authority to censor the Internet and not let anybody in France see a website the government of France doesn't think they should see, which probably includes mine. Let's be honest about that. The French people are only going to be allowed to see that which the French government wants them to see in order to control their minds. Because that's all thought control is. There's no ray gun, there's no weird machine, there's no chemical. Mind control is very easy. You control the mind by controlling what it knows. And then you let the mind do what it normally does. That's what the essence of propaganda is. Giving the mind only those bits of information that will lead the individual of their own free will to come to the conclusion that is the desired outcome, the engineered outcome here. Now, the Lebanese army is pressing ahead with their crackdown on militants, and things are really, really heating up. Now, do you remember that story that came out in the Times of Israel, which acknowledged Jewish community centers in Paris were given a warning Friday morning before the attacks happened? That's now been Orwellized. But of course, people had already screen captured the before and added the after. So you can see where they're changing the news to hide the fact that once again, certain individuals, certain selected individuals, the chosen, got advance warnings to save them out of trouble. I'm even getting a report here that people that were attempting to post that story about the Jewish centers getting an advance warning, whether it was from the Times of Israel or the Jerusalem Post, Facebook blocks them, shuts them down. In some cases, they've actually canceled entire memberships. That's also about the story where the settler rabbi came out and said the Paris attacks are payback for what Europe did in the Holocaust. That one's being blocked because it makes Israel look bad. We can't have that. It's not politically correct to put out anything that makes Israel look bad. If you want to make somebody look bad, go for the Palestinians. They're supposed to look bad. That's the rules here. Which leads us to this interesting article over at Electronic Intifada on how Israel pressures the BBC into changing headlines. And this particular example has to do with the Israeli forces in disguise crashed into the hospital at Hebron, and they just happened to shoot a Palestinian dead. Wasn't the guy they were after. Just somebody got in the way, they gunned him down. And the BBC originally ran the article with the headline, Israelis shoot dead Palestinian in Hebron hospital raid. It's a very accurate portrayal of what happened. But the headline magically changed later to Israelis in disguise raid Hebron hospital, seizing suspect. And the mention of the dead Palestinian was taken out. Now, normally when the BBC or any other corporate media makes a change like that, it's noted at the bottom of the page. In this case, it wasn't. So anybody who got to the page after the change would have been totally unaware of the original headline. And once again, alert media monitors screen capped the before and the after. Over at VoltaireNet.org, they have an interesting article. Time is running out for Pax Americana's apologists. And they, too, are commenting that the propaganda is falling apart. It's crumbling. It isn't convincing anybody, and they're running out of excuses about why they have to go on doing what they're doing. And this gets back to what I was observing about Sun Tzu and the art of war. For any ruler to have victory, there are certain things they must have, and without which they cannot prevail. One is a military that believes in the rightness of the war so that they will fight and, if necessary, die. And you must have a general population that believes in the rightness of the war so that they will bear the suffering and hardships and losses war brings even to the side of the victor. And the U.S. government has neither of those. Interesting little quote in this article: if Washington fails to overcome its own divisions immediately, he will lose control of events. In my opinion, too late. Already lost control. And they're not going to get it back, no matter what kind of a huge, gigantic false flag attack they put out. Just not going to happen. Meanwhile, the U.S. government continues to remain silent about this American journalist who was assassinated after exposing the fact that Turkey was supporting ISIS. Don't care about them. But worry about the French and all those poor French. The dead bodies around the drone strikes, assassinated reporters, you don't want to worry about them. If you worry about them, the terrorists will win. The propaganda has become very disjointed. Even people who are not students of propaganda are looking at what's coming on the corporate media and they're shaking their head and saying, this just isn't making any more sense anymore. We got to take a break for our commercials and we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And obviously, as Molly showed, this campaign of false flag terror is being cranked up to remind us all that the terrorists hate us and we have to cling to the legs of daddy government if we're ever going to be safe again. And apparently down in Nigeria, on Tuesday, 32 people were killed in a bomb that hit the crowded park in Yola, the capital of the Adamawa state in northeast Nigeria. Nobody took credit for it. The next day, there was a double bomb blast, hit the GSM market, Nasarawa, GRA. The bombs were planted close to the generators serving the market, and immediately the media is out there saying it must be Boko Haram. Well, Boko Haram, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, is a manufactured terrorist group by nation-state intelligence agencies. In fact, in my opinion, Boko Haram is the original Nigerian scam. Now, interestingly enough, ISIS has killed more Americans in Beirut than in Paris, but it didn't get a lot of press, except in their hometown newspapers. The bombing in Beirut just didn't get a lot of coverage because we're not supposed to feel sorry for those people. Oh, it's Paris, the city of light. How could they? China has now agreed to buy 24 advanced Russian Su-35 warplanes. Everybody is arming up for the coming fight. Poroshenko has signed a new Ukrainian law that grants permission for foreign troops to be inside Ukraine, including the presence of weapons of mass destruction. Now, Kiev's government is saying it's only for training. Really, it's just for training. We're getting all these NATO troops and all these weapons of mass destruction. They're just for training exercises, really. We're not going to provoke a war with Russia. Why would we do such a thing? Ukraine is trying to blockade Crimea. Even though Russia has built that new bridge across into Crimea, Crimea's northern border is still with Ukraine, across which they get trade and supplies. And Ukrainian activists are trying to organize a food blockade. They're trying to do to Crimea what the former Soviet Union did to East Germany. Starve them into surrendering their chosen government and going back to the warm embrace of the tyrant. Now, when the Soviet Union did it to East Germany, the entire world responded with the Berlin airlift. Just constant airplanes flying in all the food, medicine, and supplies necessary for East Berlin to wait out the siege until finally the Soviet Union quit and went home. They should be doing exactly the same thing to Gaza, but they won't. Tremendous amount of hypocrisy. We're heroic only when it suits us, and the rest of the time we'll distract you. Now, as you know, Jonathan Pollard has been released. His lawyer and wife are in the U.S. for the joyous reunion. The official story is that he is on parole for the next 5 years and may not leave the area of his residence without prior approval from his parole officer. Now, Netanyahu, of course, is out there saying, we want him back. He's going to give up his U.S. citizenship. He's a hero. We got to give him parades. We want him here now. And I think it's not going to be all that long before Pollard very quietly slips out of the U.S., shows up in Israel, and has his big ticker tape parade down the streets of Tel Aviv. But the corporate media continues to turn a blind eye to the scale of his treason against the United States of America. Because one of the facilitators of that transfer of U.S. nuclear war secrets from the United States to the Soviet Union was the government of Israel itself. And it's not politically correct to say anything critical of the government of Israel. You're just being a filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas all the Jewish babies in ovens 5 times. Now, Israel is starting to expel Palestinians who are living in Israel itself for the charge of disloyalty. Now, there's a word for that. It's called a pogrom. Israeli revenge demolitions leave 2 dead, dozens homeless. Israel's new policy is, if they suspect a Palestinian throwing a rock, go on in and destroy the homes of the family. By the way, that kind of collective punishment is a war crime under international law. Now, all of us, as we get into Thanksgiving next week, followed by the Christmas shopping season, there are ample symbolic targets for another false flag terror attack. And it's being sold. I mean, look at the corporate media. ISIS is coming for the White House. They're coming for Times Square. They're going to do something. And we have to look for those little giveaways that something is cooking. Like in the Paris attacks, that Facebook page that went up the day before it actually happened. Don't worry, it's been taken down. Apparently down in Virginia, they issued a BOLO warning. Be on the lookout for a bunch of guys. And then all of a sudden, without explanation, they took it down. Like, maybe these are the patsies who are going to be framed for a false flag terror attack somewhere around that Virginia area. Remember, they're talking about an attack on Washington, D.C., and my money is on the Washington Monument, the giant prick in the middle of the city, because it's already been weakened and damaged by that fracking quake. And maybe somebody jumped the gun getting the stuff out there. Now they're taking it back. So we got to keep an eye. But I'll tell you this right now, they're not going to quit. They can't stop. They need to get a major war going to distract Americans from the collapsing economy and have somebody to blame for it. Because politicians as a class of human being, are incapable of accepting responsibility for their mistakes, for their wrongdoing, for their crimes. They'll take credit for anything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it. Anything bad that happens, they look for a scapegoat. Oh, we were in an economic recovery. Didn't look like one, but we were well on our way. And then those gosh darn Russians and Chinese just had to start a world war. So we're all going to have to hunker down and learn how to live very frugally because we have to move forward, victory or death. The reality is the economy is actually collapsing. Article over at Silver Doctors saying what I have been saying for a long time. Americans have run out of money. The retail sales this holiday season are already looking to be a disaster. And this mindset coming out of Wall Street and Washington, D.C., that there's still more money out there, they just have to scam it out of us, it's a delusion. It's like when they raise the rates on the health insurance under Obamacare, they figure we're going to make more money, more tax revenues. No, they don't. Because in order to pay those higher revenues, families are having to stop buying something else. There's a finite amount of money out here, and that means the amount of potential tax revenues is also limited. And they don't get it. There is something wrong with the people on Wall Street and Washington, D.C., where they cannot think these things all the way through, or they just don't want to see it. It's an article saying, we believe, God would not let us run out of money in this country. There's someplace, it's just those selfish Americans are keeping it in their savings accounts. Well, we'll put negative interest rates on that. That'll get them to take their money out of the savings account and buy things with it here. But this is, despite all the cheery music and the decorations are already up, we're not even through Thanksgiving, it's going to be a disastrous holiday shopping season. We're cooking. That's our entire Christmas. Here, have a fruitcake. Fruitcakes make great Christmas presents because you can recycle them and send them out next year to somebody else. There are some fruitcakes out here been passed around hand to hand since the Nixon years. The Baltic Dry Index just hit a one-year low, 504. That is a red warning flag right there. That's why they're trying to get a war going. They need a distraction, somebody to blame for it before it all falls apart. We have to take our top of the hour news and commercial break. We'll be back with hour number 2 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, and the lines are loading up already, so let's go ahead and take a phone call from Michelle in Florida. Aloha, Michelle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to see if you had heard anything about the meteors or something hitting in 4 different states.
Well, they didn't hit. Basically, you had people in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee reported hearing a shock wave. And very large meteors coming down will lay a shock wave. Remember that horrific one that hit Russia about a year ago. And it does seem like we're starting to see more and more of these large objects fall down out of the sky. And that may indicate that we are starting to get back into that cometary period because, the solar system bobs up and down in the plane of our galaxy. And when it goes through the plane, the Oort cloud, the debris cloud at the very outer edge of our solar system, is disturbed. And you will see objects flying toward the center of the solar system, comets or something a little harder. And so it's basically theorized by astronomers that some 20,000 years after you go through the galactic plane, you're going to get a period of increased cometary and asteroid activity, and we could very well be going into that right now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that they didn't hit anything. The article that I read didn't have very much information at all, so I wasn't sure exactly what was going on there, but I actually have family in one of those states. So, anyways, then I wanted to see if you had seen the video of the guy who was driving down the road and had seen all the Homeland Security vans that had taken the people off of I think it was FedEx. It was either FedEx or Federal Express. I can't remember. Yeah.
You're talking about the refugees on the UPS planes.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I haven't seen the video, but I've seen the reports about it. And I can't imagine it's very comfortable for those people. Those aircraft are equipped to be lugging packages around. They don't have seats or amenities of any kind, and it seems rather strange. The only reason to be using UPS aircraft is they were hoping nobody was going to notice that they were coming in, because the UPS and FedEx aircraft don't go to the passenger terminals. They go over to the cargo area.
Right. Well, now it makes more sense of it, because I just seen a new hashtag from Obama, refugees welcome.
Yeah, well, that situation is really deteriorating rapidly, and it's creating a huge amount of anger all across Europe and here in the United States of America. The propagandists are out there trying to say, look, the Muslims aren't the terrorists are the terrorists. Yes, I agree with that, but the terrorists are gaining entry to country pretending to be refugees. And that right there is a reason to stop all this nonsense. Plus, there's the economic reality. We don't have enough jobs and food and infrastructure for the legal citizens in this country. Why are we flooding all these Syrians and Africans and Mexicans and Nicaraguans into our country unless it is part of that plan to blend us all together so they can drop the borders?
Yeah, and it is funny that Seattle and California have, declared states of emergency because of the homeless people that they have. but yet they want to bring in refugees.
And they're already on food stamps. I mean, they're on their way to being homeless themselves. It doesn't make any sense in the long term. And again, the real way to fix the refugee problem is to get the United States government to stop all these wars of aggression that are making these people refugees in the first place.
Absolutely, but it's just funny, like I said, though, because Seattle and California are the two biggest cities for Agenda 21.
California is a state.
I just wonder. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My mind is kind of over here.
Well, it's a Friday. What can I tell you? You know.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much stuff going on. It's hard to, you know.
Okay.
By the end of the week, like you said, my mind is about ready to explode with all this information. So,
yeah.
Anyways, okay, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Mo in Florida. Aloha, Mo. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael, for taking my call and giving me this outlet to express myself. I just want to say a couple of things, and I'll hang up and get your answer. You know, I know there's, if you go to Wikipedia, there's 47,000 shopping centers in the United States. About 1,100 are categorized as enclosed malls.
Yes.
We know that we have many, many undocumented people in the country here, sleeper cells, good, bad, whatever. The very fact that we haven't had any attacks in malls, and if you look at the Simon Property Group, which I've dealt with, I used to rent from them. They're good people. I was, you know, Jewish owned, whatever. They're very nice people. But we haven't had one attack in a shopping mall. And my question is this. It doesn't matter if you know, like Bush tried to say, go ahead and everybody shop after 9/11 and prove we're not afraid of terrorists. For anybody can go into a mall and take anything in there, a gun, a bomb, whatever. If they have to start checking,
they can't do that. Those are all gun-free zones. Well, yeah, I mean, you take a gun in there, ridiculous. No, the reason the malls aren't being attacked is we're going into a holiday shopping season. If there was an attack on the mall, people would have another reason to stay home, order their Christmas presents online. And that's why I know I talk about Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and the football games being a tempting target for false flag. But if they were to have a terror attack next week on Thanksgiving, that would absolutely kill Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and that would put the entire holiday shopping season into a very, very bad tailspin. So if they do it, it's being done by somebody who isn't really thinking all of the implications of what they're doing. But they're desperate. They're in a panic. They might just go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah, my point is, Michael, the fact that it hasn't happened is just proves the fact they don't want it to happen. Am I right or wrong?
You're absolutely right there. You know, they always go after symbolic targets. There's a few deaths. There's a little property damage. The only reason they brought the World Trade Towers down anyway is they were in bad need of renovation anyway, both for asbestos, and actually it was developing a problem from galvanic corrosion because of the combination of the aluminum and the steel in the salt air coming off the Atlantic. It was setting up an electric current. They hadn't thought to put in zinc sacrificial anodes on that. And the lifespan of the building wasn't all that long anyway. I keep looking at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco as a potential terror target because it's overdue for replacement. That's what they're going to do. Find something that's already damaged and in need of replacement like the Washington Monument, and that will be the target.
Thank you, Mike. I love you, brother.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to switch over to the Analog Anarchist up there in Maine, and what's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I don't know how many of our listeners are home brewers, but I am. I haven't done it in a while. And I went to get a package of dry yeast to help my cider along. And there's two issues here. There's an ingredient that's in all powdered dry yeast. That's a emulsifier. It's polysorbate 60, chemical name sorbitran monostearate.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a lot of food products. It's in all your baked stuff that you get at the supermarket.
Yes.
But when you're fermenting your own spirits, everything you put in there is going to be in that bottle that you finally bottle. I started trying to research this and find a brand that was not, and I found a lot of double talk from the manufacturers, and a lot of standards have changed in the year. Now with our harmonization of food additives, that's called number E491. And we take it here. I'm not sure what the story is in Europe, but a lot of our yeast from the big companies are coming over from Europe, and the packages are marked for European market, and it says on there, contains, as I was going to pour it in, I saw this on there, wait a minute, contains emulsifier, wait a minute, what's that? So I started checking into this situation more, and this bombshell sort of hit that this year there is a genetically modified yeast.
Oh,
and
boy.
The only market for this will be in North America because we don't label it. They tried to palm this off on the big vintners in
Okay,
California.
Analog, I got to let you go. We hit the commercial break, but thank you for letting me know about the GMO yeast. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I go back to the phone line, I'm looking at the Fox News feed. Has Obama underestimated the threat from ISIS? And they're just hammering this so hard. It is obvious they are getting ready to try something really spectacular. The new 9/11, new and improved 9/11, the sequel. It's not 9/11, it's 12/11, or whatever it is they're going to do. But they're advertising that something big is coming. All right, let's grab some more phone calls. Mateus up in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. It's the first time calling, and I'm a big fan. You got me off of Alex Jones. I can't watch him anymore.
Thank you, I think.
Oh, by the way, you're such a funny guy. I'm doing a project of like piecing together some of your funniest comments, like you're for like a tribute. And when that's ready, I'll email it to you. Maybe you could.
Oh, I'd love to have a copy of that for my ego file, which is getting really, really large.
Okay, so just made a couple of points. So, by the way, soon after Russia began the military action in Syria, Netanyahu traveled in person to visit with Putin to, quote, get clarification. And I wanted to find out, what do you think that says about their relationship? Is it a special relationship? And I don't recall any other heads of state doing that. So that kind of was like concerning for me.
Okay, Putin met with who again?
Netanyahu.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a lot of back channel discussion going on. There are the official meetings where everybody gets together and they'll have the statements, but there's a lot of private meetings going on where the real nitty-gritty is being talked about, where they dispense with the cover stories and the propaganda and say, okay, this is what's going on. You're trying to conquer here for economic reasons. You're a threat to our strategic interests. We're going to have to push back on this, and the question is, how far do you want to let it go? Obviously, the United States and Israel are acting as the provokers of the oncoming war, each for their own agenda. And I think Putin is really trying to meet both with Netanyahu and with Obama to say, you have to cool it. You cannot complete your plan. We won't let you. Let's all quit now while we still have our economies and our populations mostly intact.
Yeah, I agree with you. Do you believe that Netanyahu and Putin have a bit of a special relationship? Like,
no, not the way that Netanyahu has with the U.S. government. Russia's been resisting that.
That would just be a disaster for the whole liberty.
Well, remember one of the reasons that Russia is on the special high interest targets list is that as Putin came to power and the remnants of the old Soviet power structure were swept away, that included a lot of the oligarchs in Russia who were finally held to account for a lot of corruption and crimes they'd committed, and most of them skedaddled back on down to Israel, where they're probably sitting there and, grousing and moaning about how dare Russia kick us out just because we were cheating their people. And so that is the core of what is clearly an agenda by Israel to bring Putin down so that they can go back in and pick up where they left off, business as usual.
Right. I guess at the very least you could say that this is confirmation of how much of a player Israel is in geopolitical events. The fact that of all the heads of state in the world, the first person who jumps on a plane and in person flies over to Russia and in person goes and gets clarification from Putin is right after military intervention is taken by Russia in Syria. That just shows that Israel is not this.
No, you're absolutely right. Netanyahu went up there to tell Russia, cool it. You're getting in the middle of our little game in Syria, and Putin apparently just said, no, we're going to do what we're going to do. And, that's why we have, Israel firsters in the United States like John McCain out there screaming that, of course, we have to plan for a war against Russia. We have to crush Russia. They won't do what the U.S. and Israel tells them to do, and that makes them our mortal enemies. Okay, John, here's your rifle.
Yeah, right. So I'm in Canada, and our new Prime Minister, so far, so good, pulling out of military intervention in the Middle East. Okay, that's a good step. Not so impressed with the 25,000 Syrian refugees being fast-tracked.
Well, I think Canada's pulling out, even though it was a tiny force to begin with. It's symbolic. It's a political defeat for Netanyahu, which is why I think Canada ought to be very careful that they don't have another false flag terror attack there soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
Okay, another topic before
real quick, because there's a lot of callers. Real quick.
Okay, before the Paris attacks, the French president failed to secure his own Congress's approval for military intervention in Syria. There's also a popular poll that rejected the public support for Syrian military interventions from France. Then the president goes ahead and initiates 200 bombing runs, illegal bombing runs. Then ISIS sends a 9-minute video saying, stop it or we're going to get revenge. Continues on these bombing runs. The attacks come. Now here is where the president should be now getting thrown out of power, saying, how dare you defy the will of the people, defy the will of the Congress, get into such a mess. But instead, the president's like, oh, well, here we go. It's no doubt we're going to war.
Of course.
Let's go.
When Woodrow Wilson actually ran for president on the promise he would keep the United States out of the Great War in Europe. And that's what he campaigned and won on. Then, of course, they set up that whole sting with the Lusitania, loaded up with smuggled weapons, send it into the area where the U-boats are. It gets sunk. Oh, those helpless passengers. And immediately all the polls in support in the United States did a 180, and everybody was all hot and bothered to go get the Germans, even though World War I was actually between Austria, Hungary, and Serbia.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch to Anonymous somewhere out on West Coast-ish. What's on your mind? And we're coming up on a commercial break, so talk fast.
Okay, I have 30 years experience in the transportation field. UPS has got these rapid load and unload, like internal things for packages, so a plane can land, take off the full little things, and slide in the other ones. They looked into the transportation field with these pods that would have seats in them so they could work the charter market or fly sports. So they've got that. They just slide them in and slide them out. And UPS terminals at airports are very secure. They generally have their own hangars, storage areas, high secure fences, gates, access, and
okay, well, I was unaware of the pallets with the seats built onto them, but very clearly the use of the UPS planes was in order to conceal from the public what was going on by not letting other airline passengers see them. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back with more phone calls. Please be patient. We'll get to you, I promise. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back and grab some more phone calls here. James in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Love the T-shirt, by the way. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, that was a gift. That was definitely a gift.
Awesome. Awesome. You know what's been on my mind since the Paris shooting, or the false flag?
Yeah.
Do you remember that video or that audio recording of Donald Rumsfeld where he is just boo-hooing that nobody's on board with his plans for world domination anymore? And we might need another 9/11 to just get everybody to fall in line and just remember why they need us.
I think I actually have that video or that audio in the cart machine here. Yeah, here it is. All right.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, this president's pretty much a victim of success. We haven't had an attack here in 5 years. Hell, the perception of threat is so low in the society today that it's not surprising that the behavior pattern reflects a low threat assessment. And the same thing is in Europe with a low threat perception. The correction for that, I suppose, is an attack. And when that happens, then everyone gets energized.
There you are.
Correction for that, I suppose, is an attack.
And basically that's it. Rumsfeld is saying the public threat perception is low, meaning we're not scared enough to just blindly obey the government. And he says the correction for that is we need another attack. This is how they...
Right. I mean, he's just like a little less theatric than the guy at the end of V for Vendetta, but it's the same message.
Yeah, that's basically it. I need everyone to remember why they need us. John Hurt playing the High Chancellor. You know, that movie is wonderful. It's my favorite. I love that movie. Well, as you can see, I've got this wonderful V mask that was also a gift from a fan. A very high quality one. It's not just cheap plastic. It's very thick and sturdy.
I see that. That's awesome.
All right. Anything else, James?
Yeah, I've got a quick question for you. Have you seen this video? It's on YouTube. It's called Terrorist Shooting Event, All Facts, No BS Talk. And it talks about one of the survivors, a guy by the name of John Leader, his son.
What does it show?
Basically, it shows that this guy that's on CNN, he claims he's a survivor. It's him and his son ran from the shooter. Basically, this guy is in charge of a company called Suez Environment that's tied into Agenda 21 and one of the big players at this climate summit in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, also, this Suez Environment, if you go to their website, there he is, same guy that's like either a crisis actor or tied in somehow. Or
they just tapped him to come in and tell the story. I mean, we know that a lot of these people being put up on TV as impartial experts or witnesses, they're financially tied in with the various agendas. That's an old media trick. And I remember one time years ago when I was still living in Los Angeles and something had happened and there was a news crew there and they said, would you like to be interviewed? And I said, oh, sure. And they asked me a question. I gave them an answer. Clearly not what they wanted. They just cut and walked. Didn't even say thank you and goodbye. I wasn't useful, therefore I was not going to be put on the air.
Right? And then in this video, they talk about a Suez Environment right on their website. They're not even shy about it. They're like, we want to control the Suez Canal. We want to provide water to drought-stricken California.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got other parts like this care network that they're talking about where they want to care for the Lebanese and Syrian refugees by taking control of Syria's water. And they talk about taking control of the humanitarian resources and providing education and health care for them.
Well, you know, a big goal for the corporatization, the corporate government is they want all water to be privately owned and commoditized. We had the CEO of Nestle came out and said, people do not have a natural right to water, and we have the right to suck it out of California and then sell it back to the California people in bottles, you know, at a 500% markup, 5,000% markup.
Right.
They're paying pennies for that stuff.
It's just creepy because you see this guy and his son on CNN claiming they just ran from the shooting, and then there he is, like all smiles on his website, talking about how they want to control it.
Yeah, well, he's sympathetic to the agenda. Okay.
Right? Weird.
Okay, we're having a bad phone connection here. Anything else you want to add, James?
No, that's it. Thanks for taking my call, Mike.
All right. You got it. We're going to switch over here to James in Tokyo. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I hope you and Claire are well.
Always.
I'm sorry I have to be the bearer of bad news after being elected as the unofficial head of the What Really Happened fan club by guys like Dustin in Jersey and John in Barbados.
Okay.
So the bad news is that the Hillary campaign is not going to be a sponsor of your radio show.
I had actually already gotten the memo on that.
And I think we have to stand more with the French. The last time when the French had a problem, we sent a second-tier act, James Taylor, over there. And it showed that we really didn't care about them. And this time, I think we should send James Taylor. But we need to send an opening act, like someone from the 70s also, like Captain Tennille or Neil Sedaka, or to try and, get the favoritism from their alternative audience, maybe like the Village People or something like that.
Oh, the French are going to love that. I mean, the general population of France has a tremendous disdain for American pop culture, so would probably cause far more damage than benefit.
And they don't like John Kerry, so I think he should be replaced with Jerry Lewis. And that would really make the French happy.
I think it would. Jerry Lewis is very popular with the French people. And right now, these days, I don't think anybody likes John Kerry anymore.
And one comment before a question about global warming.
Yes.
You have a great science background. And if global warming will decrease my libido and everyone else's libido and also increase the amount of terrorists, how does that happen? Because if you decrease your libido, you're not having sex and making a lot of little terrorists. So can you explain the logic behind that?
I never saw the logic behind that because my experience through my long, considerable years of dating was the warmer it is, the easier it is to talk girls out of their clothes, and then nature will take its course and so forth and so on. But, you know, it's amazing in trying to sell this human-caused global warming nonsense, the incredible list of things being blamed on global warming, increasing terrorism, decreasing libido, and very often they're contradictory. They were blaming the rise in prostitution on global warming, even in countries where governments were openly encouraging women to go into the sex trade during the bad economy, which happened in Great Britain and here in the United States of America. Yeah, times are hard. You hot chicks, go on out and be hookers and strippers. You'll do all well. I mean, what does that tell you about the moral compass of the government?
Well, I was in Mumbai for like 2 weeks ago for about 2 weeks, and global warming didn't seem to affect them. But I do have to admit, if it was like 100 degrees there and it was 30 degrees higher, maybe there wouldn't be a population.
Yeah, I imagine when the temperature reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit, sex drives are going to be over. Okay.
And getting into something a little bit serious. My final thing, Syria. I told my son a couple days ago. I try and teach him English, and we go over some stuff in like an American newspaper and how the French were sending a ship to Syria. And I'm trying to get into that topic. And I said, at this point, I think what you're going to see is another terrorist attack in France because, and I explained to him how Putin, won against Obama, sending people in to fight terrorists who were supporting, and, the whole...
We're coming up on the break. You need to get to the point.
Okay, now at this point, what's going to happen is I think there's going to be another terrorist attack in France, and NATO's going to get so many people in there just to neuter, all the efforts that the Russians are doing. And I think this is what is exactly happening right now.
I agree. They're going to continue the terror attacks, not just in France. Spain's going to get hit, Canada maybe, definitely the U.S. during this season. Okay. Anyway, got to let you go. Got to do
Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over in the European Union, we were commenting earlier this week about a letter from the European Commission to the East Eurasian Cooperative, of which Russia is a part, saying, let's do business. And it indicates there's a certain schism opening up between the European Union and Washington, D.C. And we're getting a confirmation today with this article from Sputnik News. European Union might end friendship with U.S. as Washington's policies hurt Europe. Yeah, that's a big problem. All of the U.S. allies, the few that we still have left, are looking around at their own nations, their own economies, and realizing, hey, something went horribly, horribly wrong. And the Europeans are finally waking up. They're the ones paying the price for Washington's anti-Russia rhetoric and policies in the Middle East. They don't want to go along with that anymore. They're looking at how the U.S. wars are flooding the refugees into Europe and risk the European Union itself. It's all starting to come apart. Now, Russia has announced that with all the nations involved in BRICS, that they're all going to trade amongst each other with their own currencies. They are not defining a single currency to be used among all the BRICS nations. If you're two nations within BRICS, you trade across each other's borders, use your own currencies. That is something that is not allowed within the Western banking system, where, by golly, you will use only the currencies approved by the IMF, the chief of which is still, by a slim margin, the U.S. dollar. But the yuan is coming on strong. Russia is selling their U.S. Treasury securities and using the money to buy gold. I can't imagine who would actually buy a U.S. Treasury at this point. More than likely, the Federal Reserve is simply printing up new cash, typing it into a computer, and buying back the Treasuries. They have been doing that. The Federal Reserve now owns a huge chunk of the outstanding United States Treasury bonds. So let's talk about Obamacare. You want to talk about disaster. Article coming out of Zero Hedge. Despite the name, the Affordable Care Act, and the promises that it was going to make health care affordable to low-income workers, the majority of low-income workers in the United States of America cannot afford the Affordable Care Act. They're shut out. The actual number of Americans who have health care coverage right now is actually in decline because of Obamacare. Article over in another one in Zero Hedge talking about a family that is literally spending half of its annual income paying for Obamacare. It used to be that your housing was your single greatest expense outside taxes. Now it's Obamacare. And as a little side note, over your lifetime, paying for government is going to be the biggest expenditure you have. You will spend more on that than you spend on your housing, your cars, your vacations, your kids' education. Government is the most expensive thing you will ever buy. Are you getting value for your money? That's a question every American needs to be asking right now. I think it's time we got a government cash for clunkers program. We take our big, bloated, inefficient, broken government, we send it over to the trash yard to get crunched up in the machine into a little metal coffee table, and we get a check for $15,000 each with which to buy a smaller, more efficient, cost-effective government. I think it's time for that right now. Now, Obama promised that Obamacare would lower health care premiums $2,500 per family. They have actually increased by almost $5,000. Oh my goodness, Obama lied to us. He promised we would have cheaper health care. No, we don't. Now, interestingly enough, the White House is applauding the news of the health premium increases, saying it's slower than we expected, therefore that's a good thing. Which doesn't make any sense when you look at the original sales pitch for Obamacare. The reason the White House is actually cheering is because as premium costs go up, so do the tax revenues those premiums will generate for the government. They think. And that's where they stop thinking, and they shouldn't have. Because the problem, as I mentioned before, Americans are now so broke that in order to pay for the health insurance premiums, they have to forego something else that they would have spent the money on and generated tax revenues that way. So the actual net increase in tax revenues is going to be virtually zero. They're not spending more money, they're just being told to spend it in a different place. It's faulty, flawed policy planning. All right, we got a caller on the line. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I guess Obama was telling the truth with hope and change because I guess he meant you hope you have any change left.
Very much so.
You know, Obamacare is this ain't just Obamacare. I mean, this whole system's coming apart, and it's coming apart faster than I would have thought.
It's all fascism, where the money is taken away from the people and it's given to the wealthy and the government. Government and corporate interests are aligned together against the general population. That is the classic definition of fascism by Benito Mussolini, who won the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk.
Hey, you notice, though, all the news has, like, John McCain and Lindsey Graham plastered all over the place. You know, they're still trying to push the arming the Free Syrian Army or whatever. I'm like, come on now. Nobody believes this crap anymore.
No, they don't, because the Free Syrian Army turns around and they give this stuff. You know, they're calling them all these different names. It's simply a bunch of hired mercenaries acting as opposition to Bashar al-Assad. And no, we don't believe it anymore. And in fact, I think most Americans ought to be insulted that the government and corporate media actually thinks you're stupid enough to still be buying all of this nonsense. They think you're all morons. They think you're all complete total idiots, and you should be insulted and enraged and slap them upside of the head and say, look, I'm not the idiot you think I am.
Well, you know how much they care. Look at Brian Williams is still on the air. You know,
yeah,
so
well, he had to take a $2 million a year pay cut down to only $8 million a year. How that poor man is suffering after being exposed as a liar to the public.
But it's not just him. It's the Sean Hannity's, and they get all the neocons on it. Crowdhammers and the Bill Crystals and just the CNN with their group on. I don't remember that guy who was on Fox News who said he was in the CIA. I forgot his name, Wayne Simmons or something. But you know how many other people do anybody?
Well, they all have connections to the CIA because of Operation Mockingbird, but these people aren't being paid to tell you the truth. If corporate media wanted to tell you the truth, they could hire people at much lower prices. They could hire me, for $100,000 a year, and I'll tell you the truth. These people are paid the money they're paid because they're very convincing liars. They can tell you a lie in a way that makes you want to believe. That is what they're selling. That ability the ability to be salesmen, selling you a new candidate, a new policy, a new tax, a new war, a new car, a new medicine, whatever. That's what it's really all about. And the ones who can really do it well get the big bucks, like the Brian Williams type.
It's just a shame. I'm in New Jersey. We got crumbling roads and the rail lines are bad. They're over 100 years old. And this is where our leaders do with the money. They use them for weapons to give to the terrorists.
Oh, and to build brand new highways in Israel for Jews only. That's where a lot of your tax dollars go, believe it or not.
Yeah, oh man, I'm so irate, Mike. Sometimes I want to throw my shoes at the TV like that guy threw at Bush.
Well, don't do that unless the TV's on an extended service warranty that allows physical abuse as a cause, okay?
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, yes. Smashing up your TV is only a momentary thrill, and they are getting expensive. As the dollar, one of the reasons that we're going to have a really terrible Christmas shopping season this year is simple economics. We've lost our manufacturing. 90% of everything that's in those shopping malls had to be imported from another country. And as the value of the dollar declines, the price on those imported goods is going up. And that's another reason. By the way, closing out on Obamacare, you know what Blue Cross Blue Shield is justifying hiking their premiums by 60%? Well, because you're all living longer, because the Obamacare is taking such good care of you. You're living longer, so obviously we have to raise the rates. No, you don't. If they're living longer, you get more premium payments for that longer lifespan. It's total bovine excrement, and I think Americans are really fed up with that. I certainly am. I will have truthful government and truthful corporations, or I'm just going to go live in a cave or something. All right, we got to take another break for news and top of the hour commercials. When we come back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And for those of you watching on BAMuser, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to sit in on our third hour Fridays with her own unique perspective. So what's the first subject you want to talk about today?
The first subject, Mike, is how the attacks in Paris on the 13th look like they're going to be affecting French law. And what I'm looking at is pretty darn draconian. What President Hollande wants European Union leaders to do is suspend the Schengen on open borders and allow dramatic restrictions on freedom of movement across Europe. He is also demanding the EU-wide adoption of the passenger name record system, allowing intelligence services to meticulously track the travel patterns of Europeans, along with an extension of the state of emergency to at least, let's underline that, at least 3 months. And I say that because under the extension, French police can now block any website, put people under house arrest without trial or due process, search homes without a warrant, and prevent suspects from meeting each other who are deemed a threat.
Well, that didn't really work because apparently most of these attackers in Paris were already on the U.S. terror watch lists. France is saying they knew who they were ahead of time, and it still happened because they let it happen. Let's stop the pretense now.
Let's stop dilly-dallying around.
The terrorists have attacked over here, so we got to take all of your freedoms and communication away.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm thinking. You do not fix problems abroad with draconian anti-terror legislation at home, and the permanently enshrining of a state of emergency, Mike, that's what despots and dictators do to consolidate their power and prevent rational discussions of geopolitical issues.
Well, you know, the United States has been under various states of emergency nonstop since Roosevelt's time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Every incoming president, the first thing you do is sign a document saying, I'm extending the existing states of emergency, because under those states of emergency, the president gets more power, and the Congress gets less, and the American people get none.
Absolutely. And the other thing about Hollande, with regard to Syria, which is, you know, if it weren't so deadly serious, you'd have to laugh. But France's President François Hollande recently stated that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad could never be a part of the solution because he was a part of the problem, despite the fact that the problem was one that was created by the hands of NATO countries.
Mostly by the United States.
Yeah, hello.
You know, as part of that grand plan to dollarize the Middle East oil nations.
Yep.
And General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on that all the way back in 2003.
Yep. And in the last election, 2014, in Syria, it was adjudged free and fair by international observers.
And he won by a gigantic margin that American candidates can only dream of.
Yeah, and the incredible hubris of Hollande to demand that al-Assad has to go when overwhelmingly he is the choice of his people, it's very hard to get your mind around it.
Not really.
You know?
We've seen it here in the United States. You know, Obama has come out and said Assad's government is illegitimate. It's not up to Obama to say whether any other government is legitimate.
No.
And it's up to the people of that nation.
Yeah.
And frankly, given the behavior of the U.S. government, I have to question Washington, D.C.'s legitimacy.
Yeah. The people who need to speak for Syria are the Syrian people to resolve the geopolitical conflicts in that country.
Well, that's what Putin has been saying, which is why Putin is on Obama's special high-interest targets list.
I hope the guy's wearing his Kevlar undies.
I'm sure he is.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. I would also like to go over to an article about a former drone operator who said that he and his colleagues were horrified by the cruelty of the assassination program. And U.S. drone operators are inflicting heavy casualties and have developed an institutional cultural callous to the death of children and other innocents, 4 former operators said at a press briefing today in New York. The killings, which are part of Obama's targeted assassination program, are aiding terrorist recruitment and thus undermining the program's goal of eliminating such fighters, the veterans add.
Well, that may have been the actual agenda, because we have found out that targets are selected for the drones based on these absurd profiles, like exceptionally tall people. And that led to one of the worst abuses, where the drone operators targeted an adult man who happened to be surrounded by children. And in the thermograph, it just looked like an exceptionally tall guy. Oh, he's potentially a terrorist. We're going to kill him. And with that kind of reckless targeting, it is obviously a campaign of terror. Obama is using the drones the same way Adolf Hitler used the V-1 buzz bomb and the V-2 ballistic missile just to terrorize the population. And the net result is, by doing this, they're literally making it easier for terrorist groups to recruit. And now that we find out the U.S. has been supporting and arming these terrorist groups, now it all makes a very sick kind of sense.
And I'd like to talk about the language that they use when they are assassinating children. Drone operators refer to them as quote-unquote fun-sized terrorists and likens killing them to cutting the grass before it grows too long.
That's a comment that we actually heard out of this Jewish professor was talking about what Israel's doing to the Palestinians as mowing the grass.
Yeah. And apparently this article tried to reach the Department of Defense, which, of course, did not respond to a request for comment. And I really admire...
how do you respond to a phone call? You know, you want to talk about the war crimes you're committing?
No. Right.
Click.
Yes. And I've got to tell you, I absolutely admire the courage and candor of these military professionals who've had the courage to speak out and take a moral stand. But in light of the fact that the American government and military are creating more terrorists than they are killing, which at some level Obama has to understand, one has to wonder, is the goal here not to engulf the world in a perpetual war? They know this is happening, and yet they continue to do this, Michael.
Again, it makes sense only if the goal of the drone strikes into these countries was to build recruiting for the terrorist groups to keep
Yeah.
this upset going in order to engulf that region in chaos and redraw the map. And that does seem to have been the grand agenda all along.
You know, and it's like that old Pogo cartoon that I remember. I have met the enemy, and he is us.
Well, it's kind of interesting because we're seeing this other article that was posted to WhatReallyHappened.com. It came out of governmentslaves.info, where U.S. pilots that are involved in Syria are saying that they are being ordered not to attack ISIS locations 75% of the time.
Right.
When they have a target that's identified as ISIS, the orders come down from on high. No, you don't just stay away from that. And so the whole thing is just this very sick hoax for the U.S. to try and go on out and conquer the entire world and bring it back to the glorious days of Bretton Woods and the Cold War. And, of course, Russia and China and more nations are refusing to go along with it, like that article we mentioned earlier, where the European Union has just had it with going along with Washington's agenda. And they're trying to make nice with Russia. Saudi Arabia is approaching Russia, because going along with U.S. policy for these last 13 years has cost all of our allies dearly in the economy, in their markets, outright loss of life, and they're tired of it. They're tired of going along with this game. They went along with it because they were promised somewhere at the end of it there'd be a glorious payback in loot and plunder from the rest of the world. And at this point, I think most of these countries are coming to the same conclusion I have. The U.S. actually is not going to be able to win a conventional war against Russia and China, and is not going to be able to win even if it goes to nuclear war. And with a nuclear war, nobody wins, except, of course, the bankers who are going to loan us the money to rebuild the planet at interest.
Right. And, another thing concerning the U.S. dollar that I think is interesting. On the 30th of this month, which is a week from Monday, it looks like the IMF is going to approve the inclusion of the yuan in the basket of approved currencies for international trade.
And that's going to make Wall Street very, very unhappy, and the Federal Reserve very unhappy. They're going to be crying. I want a video of that. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, what is your next story?
Well, apparently on Monday, Congress introduced legislation to ensure corporate criminals remain above the law. How nice of them.
How wonderful. How expected.
Yes.
Which is amazing because, earlier this week, the Department of Justice changed their manual for prosecutors. It used to say the Department of Justice and corporate executives are working together to common goals of what is best for the economy. And, looking at all the prosecutions in Iceland and Iran and all these other countries versus the hands-off attitude here in the U.S. government, there was a great deal of criticism that corporate executives and bankers were being allowed to commit crimes against the public with impunity. So they changed it to say, corporate criminals will be prosecuted, but now Congress has done an end run around that by passing this legislation.
Well, it's been introduced, it's unveiled. And what it would do is decriminalize a broad swath of corporate malfeasance, a move that injects white-collar crime issues into the thus far bipartisan agenda on criminal reform for justice. The House bill would eliminate a host of white-collar crimes where the damaging acts are merely reckless, negligent, or grossly negligent. If enacted, it would make it more difficult for federal authorities to pursue executive wrongdoing, from financial fraud to environmental pollution. This comes to us, by the way, from Liberty Blitzkrieg. And folks, there are two very different levels of justice in this culture. One is for the very rich who are given every opportunity and incentive to become even more rich, no matter how immoral their methods can be. And the other is for the very poor and the desperate who can get arrested and thrown in jail for stealing a loaf of bread for their families. How les miserables is that?
Yeah, it's very miserable, and the issue here is our media, our corporate media, film, TV, always focus on street crime. Rapists and murderers and burglars and muggers and the rest of it. But
oh my.
Oh my. And the reality is that white-collar crime actually causes far more damage to the national economy than the street crime does. If you remember the Lincoln Savings and Loan collapse, the year that happened, Charles Keating and his cohorts in Congress, the Keating Five,
Yeah.
actually stole more wealth in that one incident than all of the street crime for the entire nation for the entire year.
Yeah.
And yet Hollywood and wants you to all be worried about street crime. You know, the guy on the corner who's going to pick your pocket. You be worried about that. Don't worry about the bankers. They're fine. They're just making innocent little mistakes that bankrupt the nation.
And I would like to do a little reach out and shout out to anyone who is in grocery retail who listens to the show or reads the website. And that is, please, as we approach Thanksgiving next week, and we'll soon be into the Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa seasons, find out ways that you can be a little merciful and compassionate to people who are struggling. Yes, many Americans will stuff their faces with the usual delicacies for these holidays, but there are families who can barely afford to do what it takes just to make a minimum meal. And what I'm asking...
Well, I think we can put it in the short version. There's a lot of hunger in this country.
Yeah.
And I get very angry seeing all these commercials on TV. If you will send us $20, we will feed a family on the other side of the planet. Well, that's all well and good. Mm-hmm. We have hungry people right here in the United States. They don't want you to think about it.
No.
Because they want you to believe the economy is recovering. But Claire and I are involved in 2 programs here locally. Yeah. And I can tell you the need is very real. And these are people who don't deserve to be where they are. They're not all druggies and criminals and losers.
And they're not lazy.
They're not lazy.
No.
They'd like to have a job. They'd like to have their self-respect back. Yeah. But they're going hungry. The food stamps aren't covering it. Anything that you can do to directly go on out and hand food to these people is going to work. You have to be very careful about these organized charities because more and more we find out that the vast sums of money they're taking in don't really reach the people they claim they're helping. Big scandal around Jared Fogel's charity that was going to fight childhood obesity. And it turns out his foundation, most of the money went to the director's salary. Mm-hmm. A lot of it vanished without anybody knows where it went, and none went to the actual charity itself. Mm-hmm. We know the Clinton Foundation has spent only as much on charity as it took to generate some news stories about what a wonderful charity it was. Mm-hmm. If you go out and you buy a bag of groceries and you hand it to a hungry family, you know that 100% of what you spent goes to where it needs to be. And it's also a good experience for you to go on out and deal with these people. It's like Buddha on the road.
Oh, yes.
It's going to wake you up to what's really going on. You're going to realize that these people, they don't deserve to be where they are. They didn't ask to be where they are. They are victims of the U.S. government and Wall Street policies just as much as the people over in the war zones are. And especially the significance given to Thanksgiving. You know, when you go and do your shopping, buy a few extra things and just decide, I'm not going to eat these things. I want to lose weight anyway. And just, you know, food basket, food pantry, your local church, I'm sure, probably your local church has got a food assistance program. Go in and get involved. Even if you are a non-believer like me, you got to go out and do what needs to be done.
And the 2 programs that we participate in, one is co-sponsored by my church, a Methodist church, and we're also working with a local Catholic church to try to get the need taken care of. And every time we have gone there, the number of clients appear to be larger and growing. And what is scary is it's not... In Hawaii, we have a word, kapuna. It means someone who is older, grandma, grandpa age. It's not just the kapunas.
It means us.
Well,
okay.
yeah,
Right.
It means us.
No, there's young families
yeah.
with kids, people who came out here expecting a job. The business collapsed. Mm-hmm. They don't have the money to leave. Hawaii can be a real trap. When you come on out here with your family and you've spent all the money to move here and you've been promised a job and all of a sudden the business collapses because our economy is in a shambles. TSA has destroyed our tourism industry, mm-hmm. and we'll see people who came out here and they don't have the money to leave.
Yeah.
And going down the street all the time, we'll see what we call, bug out piles where people have just enough money to get themselves on an airplane, and they have to leave everything else in their life behind. And it's sad to see. I should take some pictures of that and make an album.
I think you should. I think you should. But anything that you can do, and again, to people who manage grocery stores, food stores of any kind, check it out with the chain of command in your corporation and see just what wiggle room you might have, because it can mean the difference literally between life and death with some of these families.
It can, but also you got to take care of yourself. And unfortunately, sadly, tragically, cynically, the top management of our large food retail corporations have sent down orders. You don't give food away. You will put it in a landfill, because if those people want to eat, they should come in and buy it. And if they don't have the money, well, then if they get free food, they won't spend their money here. These people don't have money.
No.
Okay?
No.
And do what you can to help, because obviously the U.S. government is not going to take care of the American people. We have to start learning how to take care of each other, or we're not going to get through the coming disaster. We have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, your next story is...
Well, this comes to us from Washington Free Beacon. The Clinton Foundation is, as of this date, 20 November 2015, running a $20 million private equity firm in Colombia. Things that do make you want to say,
Mm-hmm.
The Clinton Foundation is operating a $20 million private equity firm in Colombia, raising concerns from government and consumer watchdogs who say that the practice is unusual and could pose a significant conflict of interest.
Well,
gee, you think?
Well, I have down in Colombia, they can do things without being bothered by all those pesky U.S. government inspectors and accountants and so forth. I mean, there's obviously a reason they set it up in Colombia outside the United States here, so that they can invest in things that they don't want made public. They're probably putting huge investment into weapons companies right now as they push for war. Let's start a war and then we'll sell everybody the stuff that they're going to fight with.
And apparently a charitable foundation running a private equity fund is not something one hears about commonly and is very concerning, according to Craig Holman, the government affairs lobbyist at the watchdog group Public Citizen. And he says private equity firms invest and take over various companies as social services for a period of time, and its intent and its purpose is to provide a reasonable return for shareholders. But if you've got a tax-free foundation getting involved in running a private equity firm, I just find that very troubling. And my observation would be, it is very difficult that Hillary Clinton has a dependency problem. It's money junkie dependency, as this private Colombian equity deal demonstrates. And I really want to ask her, quote-unquote, vagina voters out there the following question. How do you really feel about supporting a candidate with a history of her foundation taking and continuing to take foreign contributions to positively influence American foreign policy and positive deals for corporations in those companies in their behalf? And are you really comfortable with this, understanding that this is precisely what this woman is going to continue to do if, in fact, she is elected to office?
Let's move it into the context of private business, okay? Can you think of one company, just one, that would hire a corrupt, almost 70-year-old habitual liar who's currently under FBI investigation as their CEO just because she's a woman? And yet that's a big part of the Hillary Clinton campaign. They're even replaying that 1990s rape crisis. Oh, there's a campus rape crisis. You women have to vote for Hillary. She will save you from the evil males. And by the way, one of the guys who's going around selling this whole thing just got busted for faking the evidence that he's using to claim that all the men on college campuses just can't control themselves and are grabbing all the girls. It's a replay of what they did back in 1990s.
Yeah, it really, really makes me wonder. And I do not believe, because she has done this in a serial manner all the way through her professional life, what's going to make her stop when she gets to the White House? The short answer is nothing.
No, the White House will just give her more power to go on doing what she was doing. We saw what her husband Bill Clinton did. The current questions over the charitable foundation, coupled with her weak email server. We know that back in 1995, there was a big scandal because President Bill Clinton authorized the sale to China of highly sensitive U.S. technology, and Chinese money was discovered going into his re-election campaign. And it should have resulted in his impeachment, but unfortunately Congress is just as corrupt as the president.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, we have a caller on the line here. We're going to talk to Daniel in Canada. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Aloha, Claire. Sorry to be off topic, but I think today's a special day for America. It should be a wake-up call for America. This Jonathan Pollard being released. There's an empty prison cell, and maybe we can fit Pamela Geller in there or Rita Katz.
Bless you for that.
Well,
great suggestions.
I just think it's funny that he's not going to Israel after all.
Well, not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's further proof to me that, from what I've understood, he spied for money. He didn't spy for the love of Israel like we were told. He just did it for the money. But, you can't say that because, it sounds anti-Semitic. And to quote Gilad Atzmon, I know he's a friend of yours, I was watching a great video of his, and he comes out and says, Jewish power is not Hollywood. Jewish power is not AIPAC. Jewish power is the capacity to prevent you from talking about Jewish power.
Absolutely. Well, was it Molière said, if you want to learn who really rules you, find out who you're not allowed to talk about. And we're getting a lesson in that on all the American college campuses where they're literally trying to suspend the First Amendment right to freedom of speech by criminalizing any criticism of Israel. And that is exactly contrary to what the spirit of the First Amendment is all about.
Exactly, yes. And college campuses that's where the seeds of new ideas and freedom are supposed to be.
Not protected. Anymore. Not anymore. That's where they absolutely crush out any independent thought in independent analysis. You will obey the status quo. You will believe as we tell you to believe. Our entire educational system from preschool right up through graduate school is embrace what you've been told already and don't you dare step out of line. If you want an advanced college degree, you get it by swearing undying loyalty to what was declared long ago. Human caused global warming, Israel is good, so forth and so on.
Exactly. So anyways, just a call to arms for all Rivero's Rangers and fans of Mike and Claire, anyone who listens to on BAM user. I'm putting in $10 US from Canada here on PayPal. And if you don't have a PayPal account, just go to the post office and get a postal money order and send it to Hawaii. Send it to Mike and Claire. And that's what you can do to fight this. This is a war, and you can see with all this fake ISIS stuff, I mean, it's not getting any better. We have to support those who are speaking out. And if you can't find the time, then at least find a couple of bucks in your wallet. So anyways, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Claire.
Well, thank you
and bless you.
Thank you very much. And if you need a postal address, you can go. There's a donate option at the top of the website with a postal address and a who things need to be made paid out to. And by the way, I want to take a moment here to thank everybody who's been donating this last week because we have been living on the edge of collapse for a very, very long time, actually for the last 20 years.
Yes.
And some very generous people came through and they took some of the pressure off of us so that we can go into the next year continuing to fight to try and stop this war, this rush to war before we have mushroom clouds sprouting all over the country. And it is that serious. And if you cannot donate, that's fine, because the other thing that you can do that's going to help is to have the courage to speak out to those around you about what's going on. And you will find that probably most people around you share your concerns, but they were staying silent out of a sense of loyalty, politeness, or political correctness. So the more you find the courage to speak out, the more you're going to give those around you the courage to speak out. And that is just as important. In fact, I'll be honest, it's even more important than the financial support to those of us in the independent media who are trying to shout down the very well-funded liars in the corporate media, like Brian Williams. Poor boy, he had to take a pay cut to only $8 million.
Oh.
I feel so sorry for him.
Yes.
He's so unfortunate. All right, well, we're coming up on our last commercial break. When we come back from that, we're going to do our last segment of the program. We're going to turn that back over to the lovely lady Claire, so we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today on this Kaahumanu Friday, and I want to issue a quick correction. It was Voltaire who said, to learn who really rules over you, find out who you're not allowed to talk about. And all across America on college campuses, young Americans are finding out who you're not allowed to talk about. And it's not the U.S. government.
Nope.
Okay. You had a very important story you wanted to share with us?
Yes, I have a bone to pick very gently and peacefully with a WorldNet Daily columnist, Bert Pretlutsky. And the article is titled, Bomb Mecca Off the Face of the Earth. And he writes today that he has an ingenious but politically incorrect suggestion of how to defeat ISIS, namely that the U.S. bomb Mecca off the face of the earth, not concerning ourselves in the least with collateral damage, and letting Muslims know once and for all that our God is far more powerful and, yes, vengeful than their own puny deity. Okay, Bert, I have some observations for you that I feel compelled to share here. First, this is a time for government and its military to make smart choices about Middle Eastern policy, not knee-jerk, ham-fistedly, pig-headedly stupid ones. And what you are proposing definitely falls into those categories.
Well, what he's proposing underscores something I was saying earlier in the week. Mm-hmm. Religious fanaticism is not confined to any one religion.
No.
And we posted an article earlier this week about how some of the worst terror attacks in the United States were carried out by Christians.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't get the press because we're not trying to demonize Christians and start a war with them. Mm-hmm. And we've established that the people who are being held up as these terrorists are not, in fact, Muslims. The mastermind in Paris was smoking marijuana, drinking whiskey. Mm-hmm. The female suicide bomber was doing naked selfies in the bubble bath, and it turns out she wasn't a suicide bomber anyway. They're just lying.
Yeah.
And remember, this is also a feature of tyrants and dictators, to pick some group to be the scapegoat, the target. The Nazis did it with the Jews. Our government is doing it with the Muslims. And what's amazing is how this article does not seem to have triggered any kind of an outcry in the U.S. corporate media. Now, could you imagine what happened if some writer in some journal was saying, let's bomb the Vatican. To heck with the damage to Rome. Let's just show those Catholics once and for all we're going to nuke the Vatican. Mm-hmm. Or, even worse, the Temple Mount. You know, the Wailing Wall. That's caused so much trouble throughout history. Let's just turn it all into radioactive green glass and have done with it. The media firestorm would just be continuing for a month. This guy is out there saying, let's bomb Mecca to prove our God is stronger than their God, and everybody's just kind of so far, except for us, big shrug. Yeah, okay, maybe.
And the one thing that just blows me away is apparently this guy doesn't understand that his proposal will utterly guarantee that religious sites from around the world, including those in Israel, will ultimately get obliterated in retaliation. And there is going to be a point where the IDF is not going to be able to contain the wrath that is going to follow. And the thing that he seems to miss deliberately, the bottom line is that this country's military maims and kills with impunity to augment American companies' bottom line. And that's just that simple. And the fastest way I can think of to get rid of any terrorism, to stop affecting Americans or American assets, is to stop mucking about with other people's countries to expropriate resources to which the U.S. government has no moral right. I mean, there you have it.
We have the right of conquest. Yeah. That's our right here. You know, there's another agenda that we need to consider.
Okay.
And that is, of course, Israel, which dreams of greater Israel reaching from the Nile to the Euphrates. And I think Israel would be perfectly happy if something were to happen that would get all of the Christians and all of the Muslims killing each other off, and that would leave the earth pretty much, you know, for Israel and the Jewish people to rule as they see fit.
Yeah.
Of course, they can't kill us all off because they need somebody to pay retail.
And I had one last comment for Bert.
Yes.
On his statement that we need to let Muslims, quote unquote, know once and for all that our God is far more powerful and, yes, vengeful than is their puny deity. Does God really want vengeance, or is it just you, Bert, masquerading behind the facade of Judeo-Christian religion?
Well, he's also betraying his ignorance because it's all the same God. It goes back to Abraham.
Yes, they're all people of the book.
That's right. Yeah. It's the same God, whether you call it Yahweh or Allah or whatever. All of these religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all go back to the monotheistic religion of Abraham. It's the same God.
And what I'm looking here is at a state of pathological bloodlust against all Muslims And this guy must fantasize obsessively about the American military being used literally as the machine of the gods or God to bring this vengeance about, which could very well result in a catastrophic world war. And I would like to suggest to this gentleman very gently that if this is the outcome he wants, here's your rifle, here's your camo, here's your parachute, and we will inform Saudi Arabia that you're going over there to kick their keisters all by yourself.
You know, but, well, I'm sure his replies were, well, don't you know, if we burn up the entire earth, God is going to come down and invite us all to the big house. You know.
No.
You know, it really is. And again, I have to chastise the corporate media for turning a blind eye to this.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if somebody was out there writing, we need to nuke the Vatican, or we need to nuke the Jewish portion of Jerusalem.
Or Tel Aviv.
Or Tel Aviv.
Yeah,
well, Tel Aviv
yeah.
is pretty much all Jewish at this point.
Yeah.
But, you know, going on out and destroying, melting down these religious centers, it would be a firestorm of fury. And here this guy is talking about nuking Mecca, and he's being ignored. And perhaps he should be, but it's a very dangerous mindset.
Yeah.
But again, it underscores that dangerous degrees of religious fanaticism are not confined to the Muslims, or the Christians, or the Jews.
No.
Every religion has that small, tiny percentage of absolute nutcases who want to go on out and lay waste to the planet in His infinite mercy.
See, in the Christianity, I understand we want to love the planet and love the people around us and just be kind and lift people up. That's my understanding.
Well, you can't make money with an attitude like that. What's wrong with you?
No.
Okay.
But I think it is the higher road, ultimately.
I think it's the higher road, and you don't have to be religious to follow it. I mean, that's absolutely... one of the big lies we get from religion is that you must be of their religion to have a moral compass. And I would disagree with that. There's a lot of very religious people don't seem to have a moral compass, like all those clergy who are sexually molesting little kids. And, you know, I'm not a believer in any gods or goddesses except for the one sitting behind me. I think I'm a moral person, and I think I'm rather well-behaved, mostly being old.
Well, sweetheart, you know, when I describe people who don't know you at church, I always describe you as one of the most moral men I've ever met in my life, and that's one of the many reasons I love you.
Well, thank you, and I love you too. And I'm moral because at my age I don't have the energy to be evil. You know. Okay. All right, we got about 2 minutes left. If you got something short, you can drop in there.
Short, yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to wish everyone a lovely Thanksgiving. With the radio broadcast schedule, Mike, did you want to mention that for next week?
I was going to mention it on Monday, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. Our hard-worked, overworked, underpaid staff at GCN are taking Wednesday through Friday off next week, and so will we. Now, I reserve the right, if something does happen spectacularly, we'll be covering it on the website. I could even start a BAM user feed. We may even, you know, get somebody back into the control room. But Monday and Tuesday's show will be live. We're going to have the producer of the new documentary, Incontrovertible, as our guest on Tuesday. And there'll be replay shows. Actually, from Monday through Wednesday of this week, we'll be replaying Wednesday through Friday of next week so that we can go on out and do that whole thing with our turkeys and our pumpkin pies and all the rest of that other traditional stuff here. So that's going to be our broadcast schedule for next week here. So we're coming up here on the end of the show. By golly, there's the music. Have a good weekend. And please take a moment to share what you know with everybody that you know. A lot of Americans are starting to ask questions. Please be there with the gentle answers and help guide them out of the matrix into the truth. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.